She's going to pop in and out. So we're going to say good luck, hope they win, and hope you get back to us soon. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to start talking a little bit about, let's see, leadership and, virtues and practical wisdom. So, we talked a lot about why, last week. And one of the things that I'm thinking, that you may understand is that Simon Sinek not only works with people to understand their individual why, but he often works with companies, with institutions, with schools, for them as a team to understand their why, which is another thing that we do, I think, in our schools when we're setting up our mission and our vision and we're talking about our purpose as educators. So you may have guessed by now that, for us in our graduate leadership program, our why is really to develop leaders who will foster educational environments where all individuals can flourish. And it's just a simple one line, one statement. But you might wonder, like, well, how do we define character when we talk about that? And what does that have to do with a leadership program? Some people talk about character and they say, well, it's the kind of person you are. Others say, well, it's how you come across. Sometimes they say it's the virtues that make up your personality. But really and truly, it's a set of personal traits, or you might want to call them dispositions, that they actually produce some type of emotions, moral emotions, and they often inform your motivation and definitely guide your conduct. So when you start thinking about character, each of us has a distinct personality, and some of it is genetic and very difficult to change. For example, if you're an introvert, it's really hard to move into being an extrovert, right? And vice versa. So when you think about it, within personality, there are these subsets, though, and this is part of the traits that we call character. And it's kind of that personal part of personality that actually can be evaluated through a moral lens. It's something that is open to reasoning. It can be influenced by upbringing. It also can be influenced by coaching. So that's why we talk about character education. We don't talk about personality education, right? And virtues are the qualities that help us to really respond well to the challenges we face in life, basically. They're made up of different components. We need to be able to notice the right things. We need to be able to feel the right emotions. We need to be motivated to do the right thing at the right time. And, obviously it all comes out with action. But, virtues really aren't skills. Skills might be things that are competencies that are based on our personal values, but virtues are things that are rather universal. They're valuable in and of themselves because they help us as human beings to actually flourish. And so, we're going to look at a short video where the Jubilee Center for Character and Virtue kind of introduces an approach to character that would be, they're asking the question really basically, what would it take for a society to flourish? So let me stop sharing this screen and hopefully I can get the video up without making this crazy, because sometimes I do. So can you all see my screen? Okay, let's see if we can go. Let me stop sharing for a second. I'm having trouble. Sorry. Sometimes I don't like computers. Here we go.
In an ideal world, things would be quite different than they are now. There'd be no broken hearts nor hurting families, no lying, cheating, or stealing. And we wouldn't war over parcels of land or natural resources. In this perfect world, everyone would lead a flourishing life. So why isn't that our world? What would it take for society to truly flourish? New laws? New leaders? Or could the answer be far more enigmatic? Throughout history, great minds have recognized that good societies can only be produced by people of good character, identifying certain moral virtues that make up good character. Virtues such as courage and honesty, humility and self-discipline, justice and compassion, and generosity and gratitude. Those who do not cultivate and practice these virtues can amount to nothing more than a fragment of who they were meant to be. On the other hand, people who do cultivate and practice these virtues are empowered to achieve excellence and experience greater flourishing and fulfillment in their lives, making them key contributors to a flourishing society. But perhaps what is most exciting about these virtues, so critical to societal and personal flourishing, is that they can be taught and that good character can be learned by anyone. Informed by our data-rich research, with over 120,000 participants, we in the Jubilee Centre for Character and Virtues at the University of Birmingham have crafted proven curricular resources that inspire and equip everyone to cultivate moral, civic, intellectual, and performance virtues for individual and societal flourishing. Over the years, we've written more than 100 academic papers, created over 50 films, published dozens of books, and have assembled a library of more than 4,000 other publications on character and virtue. Through this work, we've reached over 1 million students and 7,000 schools in the UK alone. We've also established international partnerships and have shared our research and insights with numerous countries around the world. We've seen lives transformed, schools revitalized, and communities strengthened, all by people simply pursuing virtue. And what could be better for our world than that? So it's clear that the answer to our question, what would it take for society to truly flourish, lies within each and every one of us.
So that's just a little brief introduction to the Jubilee Center and kind of their focus. But I did want to take you to let's see if I can pull it up to see the site. Okay. Sorry, it takes me a little bit to get the right screen. So on the slide that you have in the, for this presentation, which you can access in Canvas, you can see that there is this website, this landing site for the Jubilee Center in the UK. You can see here that they've got lots of information about, what they do here. This MA in Character Education is actually a program that I graduated from. You can see here they have character education research, research on the virtues, character education, global innovation. This is really powerful. They have a lot of resources for schools. If you click on the resources for schools, you can see that they have an entire kind of, inventory that they've built. They have lists of schools they've worked with. They have an evaluation handbook. They have materials and resources where you can teach character through various subjects, primary and secondary schools. And then they have the whole library here where you can see all of the different types of things that they have. And there's a whole presentation that you can look at here that will actually take you through and show you the kinds of resources they have. It's a place that you should be familiar with because as you move through the program, you're going to be doing different character-related types of projects in each of the courses, including, this one. So it's one that I think it's a really strong resource. And it was a heavy influence on us at North Central when we began actually building this Ed Leadership program and actually building this program in the format that you're actually learning through. So just, a couple of different things on this slide that I think are important for you. Now, the other thing is that this is something that should look familiar to you. This is kind of our illustration of that you probably see. You saw it if you came to our meet and greet. You'll see it on our syllabi. And it's important for you to understand that we went through a really strong, reflective process. We started back in probably, I think that people began this work probably in December of 2018 before I joined North Central College, where they partnered with the Kern Family Foundation to really begin looking at how to take our Ed Leadership program and infuse it with virtue ethics. I came on board after the Kern Family Foundation had given them a grant where they created some roles, and we began working in the fall of 2019 on how are we going to take our curriculum, which was already really strong, which is one of the reasons we were approached to do this work, but make sure that we actually infused things through it. So you can see we've worked very hard. We want to make sure that we have the professional competencies that you need, but we also want to make sure that you develop your leadership virtues and your character. We also want you to understand all of the different leadership styles that are important. And we want to actually really highlight how all this ties together to culturally responsive teaching and leading, and also ethical leadership. So you can see that, kind of our purpose there, our why, is to develop leaders who foster educational environments where all individuals can actually flourish. And we talk about cultivating two main things. That when we look at you and we say, when you're leaving us at the capstone and we see you at graduation, we want to look at people who are ready walking out of our program, who not only have competencies and have worked on their character and worked on their leadership style and worked on their leadership skills in terms of being culturally responsive, but we want people who have developed practical wisdom. That zone, is something that really is understanding what to do at the right time and how to make judgments that are really led through with a moral compass. And we also want people who know how to go out there and actually develop cultures of character within their schools. So you can see that, research says that good leadership is actually informed by virtue, but by intentionally weaving that through our curriculum, we're hoping that we will be producing future leaders who can really make a difference in their schools as they go forward. And we're hoping that it will actually help you as you move through. So when you start thinking about, different things about character, thinking about how actors get into character. I'm always partial of talking about how actors get into character, just probably because I have a daughter in the field of the arts, and so I'm kind of sensitive to that. So I'm going to share with you just another short video. It's about 4 minutes, so I think you can bear with me. And it's also produced by the Jubilee Center, but I think it really does present kind of a humorous way, but also in kind of an impactful way to talk about really character and what is it that we're really getting at.
What is character? I don't know. Well, I kind of know, same as I'm sure you kind of know, but it's a very difficult thing to define. A question I can have a go at is this. What is a character? Aha. That's home turf for me. It's the question that I ask every day. Going to work for me means decoding a character and finding ways to express what I find inside it. It's good fun. You should try it sometime. And what I know about character, I know from all the stories I've enjoyed watching and the stories that I'm lucky enough to make with my friends. In the old days, the filmmakers used to give us a helping hand to weigh up these characters by putting the good guy in a white hat and the bad guy in a black hat. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all like to root for the hero, wish ill on the villain, hope that good will prevail. However, I prefer the stories where the main character, the person representing me, the audience, might not be so sure of who they are. Maybe their hat's a shade of grey, neither black nor white. Their fate is uncertain, like mine. And the story will reveal their character. Will reveal character. How does it do that? Well, typically, the main character will want something. She'll want the suitcase full of cash. He'll want to be world champion. She'll want to win back the boy. They're people, and what they want doesn't always show the best of them. Although she might want the truth. On occasion, he might want revenge. So they want something. That's all very well, but if this story's going to have legs, we're going to need obstacles, things that are stopping them from getting what they want. The universe isn't just going to acquiesce because we happen to want something. Our hero has to jump hurdles, negotiate a path through to get the better of impossible odds. Maybe the obstacle isn't external. Maybe it's inside them. It's doubt, fear, uncertainty. And maybe that's as much a part of them as wanting what they want. So there's a struggle against the internal and the external. Now you're talking. Now I'm hooked. Will she be able to, can he overcome his? Has she got what it takes? Has she got the character? And then there's a few twists, a couple of surprises, and some laughs never hurt anyone. And what? Does she get what she wants? Maybe. Is that a happy ending? Possibly. Sometimes, though, characters don't end up getting what they want, but through their struggle, they reach something bigger, something finer, something they didn't know they even needed. Sometimes the character will come through that struggle to a moment of truth. That's the reward for the honesty and courage they've shown in their quest. They come face to face with a version of themselves they didn't know existed. Perhaps it didn't exist until that moment, and they find something more valuable than a suitcase full of cash or the world championship. It's something inside them. She might discover that she's tenacious, grateful, kind. You might discover that you're compassionate, loyal, capable of an empathy that you never suspected before. You might lose the boy and make a friend for life, or reconnect with your father, or emerge with a newfound sense of purpose to propel you into the rest of your life. So the ending is a beginning. Sounds better than revenge that's going to cost you everything, doesn't it? And these are the moments that stories are for. Moments of clarity, moments of truth, where our characters discover that they have character. Moments like, Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Carpe diem, boys. Seize the day. Make your lives extraordinary. May the force be with you.
So, any inspiration there?
That reminded me of two things. Um, with all that we've read so much, I don't remember where I read this, but there was one thing that we read that talked about the heroine's journey, and they compared it to what was traditionally the hero's journey into what is now the hero's journey. And I don't remember which reading that was that we read, but that's what it made me think of, what he was talking about, all of the the obstacles that we have to go through for that journey. Um, it also reminded me of something else that I can't remember. So it'll have to come back to me. But
Yeah,
yeah.
Lindsay? You know,
Yeah, I agree. What resonated with me was it's about the journey, and I think it was I can't remember now where I heard it. I think it might have been Keegan's interview, but they say it's an end in itself, not a means to an end, right? Like, so they want that cash, but that's not the end. That's just the means to the end. It's an end in itself. It's about the journey.
yeah. Yeah, and I think it's, it's yeah, again, I think it's a very well played 4.5 minute video, but it really helps you to understand that, we all are working on our character, right? And it's all a journey, and we're never fully developed, which is like I've mentioned before. That's one of the things that's makes character education challenging in terms of getting everyone to accept it, because it's not necessarily something we can measure, and students can get an A, B, or a C, or an 80% or a 90% on it. It's a lifelong journey, right? That we're all on, all of us together. So let's go on and see if we can talk a little bit more about it. So obviously we are going to be looking at intellectual virtues, moral virtues, civic virtues, and performance virtues. You looked at these when you read the very first article in week 1, when you read the Jubilee Center, framework for character education. And we looked very hard at that as well when we were developing our program here. Now, we didn't take all of the exact same intellectual, moral, and civic virtues that are in the building blocks at the Jubilee Center, but we did contextualize it for ourselves, because that's important with character education. It really has to be contextualized. And we really kept focusing on the fact that we really want to make sure that we're looking at what Aristotle calls phronesis, or practical wisdom. The other thing that's important to remember is that it's often described as the right thing to do for the right reason, and the right amount, and at the right time. And he talks about it in his work, which is not always that easy to delve into, but he talks about the golden mean. Because basically, essentially, any virtue can become a vice, because we can use it to excess, or we can use it in a way that is very deficient. If you think about somebody with courage, they have too much courage, they could actually be foolhardy. if they don't have enough courage, they might actually be cowardly, right? And so Aristotle talks about, that we have this golden mean with all of these different virtues, and they can go either way. There's a fine line between a virtue and a vice. And part of that fine line is practical wisdom, right? That's the idea of being able to decide what really and truly, when we're making decisions and we're solving problems, what and really can we do as leaders? Because it's really a key skill, a very key skill. The other thing that we really kind of studied when we were trying to put our program together is the idea of, we read a lot of the articles that you are reading in this program. We really did a lot of work in terms of looking at websites. We gathered information. We dug into Aristotle, but we also dug into Confucius. The article that you're going to read this week by Hackett and Wang is focused on a lot of the work in these cardinal virtues. So, this is some of the stuff that we really kind of dug into and that we really wanted to understand. We also looked at different examples. So, for instance, we did some time looking at Character Lab. I'm sure many of you have heard of Angela Lee Duckworth. If you're not remembering her name, you probably remember that she did a lot of work with the idea of developing grit in students, right? Some of her work was very well accepted. Some people criticized it in certain ways. I had the pleasure of meeting her at one of our very first convenings of people that are working in character education back in June of 2019. She had established at that time a place called the Character Lab. And when she talked about character and developing it in students, she really had a smart idea. She talked about the heart and talked about the mind and talked about the will or the hand, right? So kind of the heart, the head, and the mind, hand. And she talked about the fact that when you're talking about interpersonal strengths, the ones that you actually use to relate in good ways are things like gratitude and kindness and empathy. And then when you talk about interpersonal strengths, which are the ways you actually, relate with other people and the way you function in the world. So there's where you're talking about things like curiosity and creativity and humor. And she also talked about intellectual strengths, which are the ones, where you actually are doing things, right? And she talks about grit, of course, heavily, and self-control. One of the things that she had established was the Character Lab website. Now, I believe that Character Lab website was grant funded, and I don't believe that it still is in operation in the way that it had been, when I began getting familiar with it. But you can actually use the link on this page, and you can go to her Character Lab site where they've archived a lot of the things that were there for the development of it. You can kind of see the disclaimer there that this is kind of a legacy, that it sunset back in 2014, and it tells you a little bit why. But one of the things that you'll find here is that they have things like playbooks, and these are like lots of different ways that you can talk about gratitude and judgment, grit, decision making, growth mindset, honesty, productivity, intellectual humility, social intelligence, lots of resources, lots of tips for how you can do on things like this. And also, just a lot of different information about Character Lab, a lot of resources here. I've often used a lot of information working with, students where these actual playbooks take place. So for instance, if you click into the Curiosity playbook, you can see that there's usually a quote. There's usually something that tells you a little bit about why it matters. And then it also always talks about modeling it and how there are ways that you can actually do that for students. So I think it's a very rich website, and I'm glad they've archived it, because sometimes when they sunset, grant funded places like that, they don't always do us the honor of keeping it and keeping a legacy site. So it's another resource when you're looking at things that you want to learn about characters. We studied it pretty heavily when we were creating our program here. The other thing that we did was we spent a lot of time digging into the work that was done by Christian Peterson and Martin Seligman. There's a Character Strengths and Virtues Handbook, a classification that they produced that is it's kind of the seminal piece of work in this area in terms of looking at characters and virtues and strengths. Unfortunately, Christopher Peterson passed away not too long after this was published. And this is literally a handbook. I could show you mine from my shelf here. It's about 800 pages. It's this thick. Lots and lots of information here about what's done there. But what's interesting is they did so much research. They did global research. They went into the literature. They went into different countries. They interviewed people. And they came up with kind of the classifications, just like you have medical classifications and psychological classification handbooks. They kind of use that model, right? And so they talked about, 6 big classifications of virtues: wisdom, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, and transcendence, as you see on the screen here. But then what they did is through their research, they also looked at the strengths that support each of those. So you can see that, say, under humanity, there's love, kindness, and social intelligence. Under transcendence, there's gratitude, hope, humor, spirituality, appreciation of beauty. So a lot of really beautiful pieces that they pulled together. The other interesting thing that they did was that they actually developed, and some of you may be familiar with it, but it's a virtues in action assessment that you can take. And this is what we're going to do during our break now, because we're overdue for a break. So when you go to our course in Canvas, let's see if I can pull that up. In our Canvas site, and you open the module that says presentation materials for today, it's going to look like this. You'll see that, we have, this is the PowerPoint that we're using this evening, but right here, this link here takes you to the character strength survey. So you don't have to worry about where to go. You just need to go into our module and click on this. This is going to take you to a survey. Did that change for you? Can you see my screen? I can't see you. Can you see this website?
You can see it.
Yes.
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 Okay.
Yes.
So the website is very simple. Just what you want to make sure is that you don't click anything that costs money. Okay. You just want to take, the survey. You want to take, obviously, the adult level survey. And what's important is that you do have to create a password, and you have to give them, I think, your email information, because they're going to email you the results of the assessment. So it's basically going to take you through a series of questions that you're going to answer, and then it's going to email you the results, which will kind of rank those 24 items in preference to what are your strongest all the way down throughout there, how you rank on these. Does that make sense? So it's 6:32. Let's come back at 6:45. That gives you time to take the survey, get up, get something to eat or drink, and come back. So just turn off your camera, take the survey, take a break, make sure that you send it to yourself as an email so you have the results when we're finished. Again from Megan. So as we're popping in, any reactions, like, anything you found surprising, something that, either completely surprised you in terms of the way you scored, or maybe really affirmed that, oh yeah, that's exactly, I always knew who I was. Any thoughts? Holly?
Yeah, so my number one was love, and I kind of already knew that one. I've always been told, like, I'm always like the go-to person for like every little thing, whether it be with family, whether it be with work, whether it be with friends. Like, I'm always the person that everyone leans on for support. So that really wasn't surprising to me to see that one. The one that was surprising is I got one of my top ones was leadership, and I just have never like really looked at myself as what like a leader in that aspect. So like when I saw that, I was just like, oh, that's interesting. So it's good like just kind of see that.
It's kind of a good sign that you're in the right place at the right time. Anyone else have any surprises? Or pretty much what you expected? No comments. Some people are still reading their reports. Is that it? Gives you a pretty extensive report. Yeah. This is an interesting exercise as a leader to do. There are a couple of different things that we'll do throughout this semester, but this is kind of an interesting exercise to do with the group of a team, whoever you might be leading. So if you're like a team leader or a department chair, or, even working with any type of a leadership role, the people that are in your care, that are part of your team, it's kind of a neat thing to do and share with each other, because it gives us an insight, not, just like trying to figure out their way of knowing, but this is another way that gives us an insight into looking at people's strengths and where we can play to their strengths and where we can help them, to use those and to actually have those strengths be something that they can build on and use in their roles. There's a couple of other different things that we'll explore as we go on, and we'll talk about them. But I think this is a good exercise to start with because it really, you probably saw a pattern in the questions, that there's kind of cycles in the questions and there's kind of a pattern in the way they ask them, but it does get added in a different way so that you have some pretty good evidence of how you are ranking yourself. It's a self-report, which is always, a little bit tricky in terms of, did you answer it honestly or did you answer it the way you think they wanted to hear? So that's also something you have to be careful of when you do these kinds of things. But I do think that as someone said, it's a really good thing to give you a point for reflection. And again, that's part of what we're going to be doing in this whole program is really reflecting on who you are and how you lead and who you'll be as a leader when you move into your leadership programs. So we did spend a lot of time as a team at North Central looking at this, looking at all of these things on the wheel and the way different things fit together. And we also went back to our roots, which was the very first article we read, which is the one what you read in week one is probably the third iteration of that. So we read the original one, and since then we've kept up and we've reread all of these. Obviously, I've reread all of them, but we went back to that and started looking at how we wanted to build our program. One of the things that's really important to remember is that when you're talking about building, character and virtue through your program, it has to be something that reflects your audience, right? It cannot be, that's why I'm not a proponent, I'll be perfectly honest, I'm not a proponent of what they call boxed curriculum that just, and there are some out there that are great, but like you can't just take any boxed curriculum and drop it in every single school and it will be effective the same way. So when people say that they're using, character counts or they're using second step, nothing wrong with those, but you have to contextualize them. You have to pick and choose what fits your context. And so we did the same thing. And this is where I know you've seen this, and you'll be seeing it a lot, but this is how we actually came up with this. Now, this is our second iteration because like I told you, we were working through 2019 and 2020, began revamping our curriculum, began instituting things. And by 2021, we were full into our new program in terms of how we had taken all of our strong courses and infused them with character education and virtue development for leaders. Then, of course, obviously, with best practice in 2024, we did some revisiting, right? Because you want to say, okay, is this still where we are? We didn't change much. I would say, to be perfectly honest, I think we moved a couple of virtues into different categories because we decided they fit better in different categories. And we maybe redefined things a little bit more. We had originally talked about perseverance as a performance, and we changed it to resilience. And I think that's part of our experience having come through COVID. We thought resilience was probably a better word, especially as we've all gotten involved in that. And I think we moved, one of the ones that we had forgotten to add the first time was gratitude. So we moved that back in and put that in there. And I think we moved justice from one category to another. I think we moved from moral over to civic. But otherwise, this is kind of the framework that we work from. And it took us a while to contextualize this. But what's kind of I want you to focus on is what's right in the center. Again, practical wisdom, that all of these virtues could become vices if we don't look at guiding them with that moral compass. So I think of practical wisdom as kind of the guiding center that controls how we actually put these very, very important intellectual, moral, performance, and civic virtues into practice. So again, this is something we'll be talking a lot about. And I think a lot of times we have to kind of really clarify, like in terms of what is practical wisdom. And there's a lot of different ways to talk about it, but you're moving into leadership roles, whether it's leadership from where you are, leadership in a team, leadership of a division, leadership of a department, leadership of a school. The whole idea of being a leader is that you're going to be dealing with making decisions, making judgments, solving problems. And a lot of times these problems they're tied in with ambiguity, right? They actually have conflicting values. And so this is where we have to be careful of how do we find the right path. Aristotle calls it phronesis. We call it practical wisdom. My husband says it's good common sense. There are lots of different ways to describe this, but it's all about developing the skill to make the right choices, and to figure out what to do in any given moment, because there are things that come up that are a crisis or a dilemma that will kind of drop on your lap in a moment's notice. So this is really important because you have to have not only the moral will, but you have to have the moral skill to figure out how to do the right thing on a daily basis. You do it in your classrooms already. And what we're hoping is that as we move through this, you're going to strengthen your moral compass so that you'll be able to do this in a way that's really rich. No, I am going to show you a TED Talk. I do have a partial affinity for some of these TED Talks, and I warn you ahead of time. This one's about 20 minutes. How many of you have read the work of Barry Schwartz? Anyone in particular read it? Good. Then you will enjoy meeting Barry. And this is a book, a TED Talk he did, kind of similar to what happened to it's kind of similar to what happened to Simon Sinek. Simon Sinek did that TED Talk and then he ended up writing the books and now, consulting with people and helping them with things. Barry gave this TED Talk. And then after he gave the TED Talk, it was just so wildly popular that he ended up actually writing a book with one of his colleagues that is really powerful. So you can see my screen, right? You can see the video coming up. Okay.
Yes.
I'm always checking because once I do this, I can't see you unless I pull you into this whole screen. So let's take a look at and meet. So wait a minute. Now we got something wrong with the audio. Let me check.
Us to give our best as we try to extricate ourselves from his inaugural address. Barack Obama appealed to each of us to give our best as we try to extricate ourselves from this current financial crisis. But what did he appeal to? He did not happily follow in the footsteps of his predecessor and tell us to just go shopping. Nor did he tell us, trust your country, invest, invest, invest. Instead, what he told us was to put aside childish things, and he appealed to virtue. Virtue is an old-fashioned word. It seems a little out of place in a cutting-edge environment like this one. And besides, some of you might be wondering, what the hell does it mean? Let me begin with an example. This is the job description of a hospital janitor that is scrolling up on the screen. And all of the items on it are unremarkable. They're the things you would expect. Mop the floors, sweep them, empty the trash, restock the cabinets. It may be a little surprising how many things there are, but it's not surprising what they are. But the one thing I want you to notice about them is this. Even though this is a very long list, there isn't a single thing on it that involves other human beings. Not one. The janitor's job could just as well be done in a mortuary as in a hospital. And yet, when some psychologists interviewed hospital janitors to get a sense of what they thought their jobs were like, they encountered Mike, who told them about how he stopped mopping the floor because Mr. Jones was out of his bed, getting a little exercise, trying to build up his strength, walking slowly up and down the hall. And Charlene told them about how she ignored her supervisor's admonition and didn't vacuum the visitors' lounge because there were some family members who were there all day, every day, who at this moment happened to be taking a nap. And then there was Luke, who washed the floor in a comatose young man's room twice because the man's father, who had been keeping a vigil for 6 months, didn't see Luke do it the first time, and his father was angry. And behavior like this from janitors, from technicians, from nurses, and if we're lucky every now and then, from doctors, doesn't just make people feel a little better, it actually improves the quality of patient care and enables hospitals to run well. Now, not all janitors are like this, of course, but the ones who are think that these sorts of human interactions involving kindness, care, and empathy are an essential part of the job. And yet their job description contains not one word about other human beings. These janitors have the moral will to do right by other people. And beyond this, they have the moral skill to figure out what doing right means. Practical wisdom, Aristotle told us, is the combination of moral will and moral skill. A wise person knows when and how to make the exception to every rule, as the janitors knew when to ignore their job duties in the service of other objectives. A wise person knows how to improvise, as Luke did when he rewashed the floor. Real world problems are often ambiguous and ill-defined, and the context is always changing. A wise person is like a jazz musician, using the notes on a page, but dancing around them, inventing combinations that are appropriate for the situation and the people at hand. A wise person knows how to use these moral skills in the service of the right aims, to serve other people, not to manipulate other people. And finally, perhaps most important, a wise person is made, not born. Wisdom depends on experience, and not just any experience. You need the time to get to know the people that you're serving. You need permission to be allowed to improvise, to try new things, occasionally to fail, and to learn from your failures. And you need to be mentored by wise teachers. When you ask the janitors who behave like the ones I described how hard it is to learn to do their jobs, they tell you that it takes lots of experience. And they don't mean it takes lots of experience to learn how to mop floors and empty trash cans. It takes lots of experience to learn how to care for people. At TED, brilliance is rampant. It's scary. The good news is that you don't need to be brilliant to be wise. The bad news is that without wisdom, brilliance isn't enough. It's as likely to get you into trouble and other people into trouble as anything else. Now, I hope that we all know this. There's a sense in which it's obvious, and yet, let me tell you a little story. It's a story about lemonade. A dad and his 11-year-old son were watching a Detroit Tigers game at the ballpark. His son asked him for some lemonade, and Dad went to the concession stand to buy it. All they had was Mike's Hard Lemonade, which was 5% alcohol. Dad, being an academic, had no idea that Mike's Hard Lemonade contained alcohol, so he brought it back. And the kid was drinking it, and a security guard spotted it and called the police, who called an ambulance. They rushed to the ballpark, whisked the kid to the hospital. The emergency room ascertained that the kid had no alcohol in his blood. And they were ready to let the kid go, but not so fast. The Wayne County Child Welfare Protective Agency said no, and the child was sent to a foster home for 3 days. At that point, can the child go home? Well, a judge said yes, but only if the dad leaves the house and checks into a motel. After 2 weeks, I'm happy to report the family was reunited, but the welfare workers and the ambulance people and the judge all said the same thing. We hate to do it, but we have to follow procedure. How do things like this happen? Scott Simon, who told this story on NPR, said, rules and procedures may be dumb, but they spare you from thinking. And to be fair, rules are often imposed because previous officials have been lax and they let a child go back to an abusive household. Fair enough. When things go wrong, as of course they do, we reach for two tools to try to fix them. One tool we reach for is rules. Better ones, more of them. The second tool we reach for is incentives. Better ones, more of them. What else, after all, is there? We can certainly see this in response to the current financial crisis. Regulate, 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 fix the incentives, fix the incentives, fix the incentives. The truth is that neither rules nor incentives are enough to do the job. How could you even write a rule that got the janitors to do what they did? And would you pay them a bonus for being empathic? It's preposterous on its face. And what happens is that as we turn increasingly to rules and incentives may make things better in the short run, but they create a downward spiral that makes them worse in the long run. Moral skill is chipped away by an over-reliance on rules that deprives us of the opportunity to improvise and learn from our improvisations. And moral will is undermined by an incessant appeal to incentives that destroy our desire to do the right thing. And without intending it, by appealing to rules and incentives, we are engaging in a war on wisdom. Let me just give you a few examples. First, of rules and the war on moral skill. The lemonade story is one. Second, no doubt more familiar to you, is the nature of modern American education. Scripted, lockstep curricula. Here's an example from Chicago kindergarten. Reading and enjoying literature and words that begin with B, the bath. Assemble students on a rug. Give students a warning about the dangers of hot water. Say 75 items in this script to teach a 25-page picture book all over Chicago in every kindergarten class in the city. Every teacher is saying the same words in the same way on the same day. We know why these scripts are there. We don't trust the judgment of teachers enough to let them loose on their own. Scripts like these are insurance policies against disaster. And they prevent disaster. But what they assure in its place is mediocrity. Don't get me wrong, we need rules. Jazz musicians need some notes. Most of them need some notes on the page. We need more rules for the bankers, God knows. But too many rules prevent accomplished jazz musicians from improvising. And as a result, they lose their gifts. Or worse, they stop playing altogether. Now, how about incentives? They seem cleverer. If you have one reason for doing something, and I give you a second reason for doing the same thing, it seems only logical that two reasons are better than one, and you're more likely to do it. Right? Well, not always. Sometimes two reasons to do the same thing seem to compete with one another instead of complementing, and they make people less likely to do it. I'll just give you one example because time is racing. In Switzerland, back in about 15 years ago, they were trying to decide where to site nuclear waste dumps. There was going to be a national referendum, and some psychologists went around and polled citizens who were very well informed. And they said, would you be willing to have a nuclear waste dump in your community? Astonishingly, 50% of the citizens said yes. They knew it or thought it was dangerous. They thought it would reduce their property values, but it had to go somewhere, and they had responsibilities as citizens. The psychologists asked other people a slightly different question. They said, if we paid you 6 weeks' salary every year, would you be willing to have a nuclear waste dump in your community? Two reasons. It's my responsibility, and I'm getting paid. Instead of 50% saying yes, 25% said yes. What happens is that the introduction of the incentive gets us so that instead of asking, what is my responsibility? All we ask is, what serves my interests? When incentives don't work, when CEOs ignore the long-term health of their companies in pursuit of short-term gains that will lead to massive bonuses, the response is always the same. Get smarter incentives. The truth is that there are no incentives you can devise that are ever going to be smart enough. Any incentive system can be subverted by bad will. We need incentives. People have to make a living. But excessive reliance on incentives demoralizes professional activity in two senses of that word. It causes people who engage in that activity to lose morale, and it causes the activity itself to lose morality. Barack Obama said before he was inaugurated, we must ask not just is it profitable, but is it right? And when professions are demoralized, everyone in them becomes dependent on, addicted to incentives, and they stop asking, is it right? We see this in medicine. And we certainly see it in the world of business. It is obvious that this is not the way people want to do their work. So what can we do? A few sources of hope. We ought to try to remoralize work. One way not to do it: teach more ethics courses. There is no better way to show people that you're not serious than to tie up everything you have to say about ethics into a little package with a bow and consign it to the margins as an ethics course. What to do instead? One, celebrate moral exemplars. Acknowledge when you go to law school that a little voice is whispering in your ear about Atticus Finch. No 10-year-old goes to law school to do mergers and acquisitions. People are inspired by moral heroes, but we learn that with sophistication comes the understanding that you can't acknowledge that you have moral heroes. Well, acknowledge them, be proud that you have them, celebrate them, and demand that the people who teach you acknowledge and celebrate them too. That's one thing we can do. I don't know how many of you remember this. Another moral hero, 15 years ago, Aaron Feuerstein, who was the head of Malden Mills in Massachusetts. They made Polartec. The factory burned down. 3,000 employees. He kept every one of them on the payroll. Why? Because it would have been a disaster for them and for the community if he had let them go. Maybe on paper our company's worth less to Wall Street, but I can tell you it's worth more. We're doing fine. Just at this TED, we heard talks from several moral heroes, two particularly inspiring to me. One was Ray Anderson, who turned a part of the evil empire into a zero footprint or almost a zero footprint business. Why? Because it was the right thing to do. And a bonus he's discovering is he's actually going to make even more money. His employees are inspired by the effort. Why? Because they're happy to be doing something that's the right thing to do. Yesterday, we heard Willie Smits talk about reforesting in Indonesia. And in many ways, this is the perfect example because it took the will to do the right thing. And God knows it took a huge amount of technical skill. I boggled at how much he needed to know and his associates in order to plot this out. But most important to make it work, and he emphasized this, is that it took knowing the people in the communities. Unless the people you're working with are behind you, this will fail. And there isn't a formula to tell you how to get the people behind you because different people in different communities organize their lives in different ways. So there's a lot here at TED and at other places to celebrate, and you don't have to be a mega hero. There are ordinary heroes like the janitors who are worth celebrating too. As practitioners, each and every one of us should strive to be ordinary, if not extraordinary heroes. As heads of organizations, we should strive to create environments that encourage and nurture both moral skill and moral will. Even the wisest and most well-meaning people will give up if they have to swim against the current in the organizations in which they work. If you run an organization, you should be sure that none of the jobs have job descriptions like the job description of the janitors. Because the truth is that any work you do that involves interaction with other people is moral work. And any moral work depends upon practical wisdom. And perhaps most important, as teachers, we should strive to be the ordinary heroes, the moral exemplars to the people we mentor. And there are a few things that we have to remember as teachers. One is that we are always teaching. Someone is always watching. The camera is always on. Bill Gates talked about the importance of education, and in particular, the model that Kip was providing. Knowledge is power. And he talked about a lot of the wonderful things that Kip is doing to take inner city kids and turn them in the direction of college. I want to focus on one particular thing Kip is doing that Bill didn't mention, and that is they have come to the realization that the single most important thing kids need to learn is character. They need to learn to respect
sorry, I don't know what happened there, but that's almost the end of his, I think there was like 1 minute left. Any thoughts about that presentation?
This is exactly what I needed to hear. I honestly, like, I find myself struggling because I have some students who incentives haven't worked, behavior charts haven't worked, and just like hearing him talk about the fact that like I need to focus more about just their mindset and like their purpose in the classroom.
Mhm.
I think that is the direction I'm going to lead with.
I think it's going to be important to really make a focus on, talking about, character and talking about values and talking about who we are as people, because those are the things that are going to make a difference, right? In changing things in the classrooms. Yeah, it's really powerful. So I'm going to pause the presentation there because it ran a little long. I didn't pause it on purpose. I don't know what happened to Barry, but he wrote a wonderful book after that that's called Practical Wisdom with one of his colleagues, and it's something that is really, I think, a good read and something to think about, in your leisure time, maybe when you're finished with the master's program or when you've got time over break. I want to segue right now, though. I want to segue into just introducing you to the framework for how we're going to do these case studies, these ethical dilemmas each week. I didn't want to push it last week. We had a lot to cover, and I wanted to get things off the ground in the correct way. But what I'm going to explain to you is that each week that we meet, we're going to end the evening, probably, hopefully the last hour or so, between 45 minutes to an hour, and I'm going to present to you an authentic education-based ethical dilemma. I'm going to put you in teams, and you're going to follow a very specific strategy, a specific framework. So let me just kind of share my screen one more time. Oh, stop. Wrong one. Sorry. One day I'll get this better, right? No, it won't work. I better close the other one. All right, hold on. Bear with me. It's not my forte. Let's see if I can do this. I'm gonna have to close that one. Okay. And third time's the charm, right? Okay, here we are. So what you're going to see here is a framework for looking at dealing with problem solving, ethical dilemmas, crises, whatever you want to call them. This is something that I developed over time, and it's actually something I authored. It started out when I was a student in a master's program at the University of Birmingham studying character education. And one of our projects dealt with, reflection and dealing with, building reflective frameworks, looking at different things. So I started it there. It's gone through a lot of different iterations, but it's become something that has kind of taken off. And my focus was to build something to help people practice right now, like when you're in a program like this, to practice, 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 and build a habit of how you approach these things. I'm a very firm believer that collectively we are much smarter than we are alone. And my whole focus and my research is always focused on collective phronesis, about how together, working together as a team, we'll come up with better solutions than we could do alone. So with this particular framework, I designed 4 different phases, okay? The first one is really all about the ethic of critique, and it's really about being present. One of the things I think that doesn't happen when people are presented with a crisis or a dilemma to deal with is people feel like they have to be pushed into action immediately right away. People expect snap decisions. And I think whenever possible, and I think by practicing this as groups, as you move through this program, in this course and in all the other courses, you're going to start beginning to understand that people have to pause. You have to hit that pause button, and you have to understand the whole situation. And you have to understand what's applicable to the situation. So one of the things that I ask is that when I present an ethical dilemma to you, you're going to be in groups, you're going to have a copy of this framework, and one person in the group is going to kind of serve as the scribe and take notes. Or the other alternative is that you can put this into Google Docs and you can work together. But I want you, when you're presented with an ethical dilemma, to first of all, start sharing what was your initial reaction. What did you really think about this? Like, what blew you away? What did you think right away? Then what are the questions that you really need to answer to actually be able to do anything with this situation? And then what kinds of codes of ethic or school rules or policies are things that actually should be pulled into this conversation? Then I want you to think about virtues. what virtues are really relevant to this particular dilemma? And are there any that are in conflict? For instance, is there something here about loyalty versus being honest? One of my teachers at the University of Birmingham always used to say, when his wife would come out and say, "Well, what do you think of this dress? Does it make me look fat?" And he would said he would get very nervous at this question because there was really no safe answer there. So, do I go for the virtue of honesty? Or do I go for the virtue of, compassion and maybe loyalty? So this is when we're talking about, the fact that there are virtues that are in conflict. And if there are, which ones do we really have to prioritize? The other thing about being present is you have to think about all the possible stakeholders, because many times when an ethical dilemma or a crisis appears, we don't pause to think about what's the pebble in the pond? Who else is actually impacted by this? So once you've worked through that first phase and jotted your notes about your reactions, your questions, and all of these things, you move to the second phase. And here we're really striving to move you into the ethic of care, right? So what are the emotions, interests, relationships, perspectives of all those stakeholders that you listed in phase one? What are the beliefs or virtues that may impact them? And what do you think is essential and what is noise in this situation? That's a critical piece. What are the biases? Let's name them so we know what's happening there. And who are the players here? Who really has to grapple with this moral issue and who does it really rest with in the end? Again, this is really framing and considering all the perspectives of everyone there. So we're slowing the process down, right? We're being present, we're looking at the perspectives, and then we want to engage in a really rich dialogue that leads us to be making decisions that really are under the umbrella of the ethic of justice, right? What can we do to represent everyone's rights and yet reach maximum benefits? So asking questions like, what would the profession expect? Your fellow educators. What would the community, the broader school community expect? What's the right decision for students? Now, we often get to these kinds of things and we say, well, what's option A or what's option B? And a lot of times that's just, here we go this way or we go this way. I want you to get an option A and I want you to pull out an option B, but I want you to really strive, is there a different way? This is being creative. We're playing. It's role playing. It's practice. Is there a different way this could be handled? That maybe if you were in control as a leader, that could really be done in a way that thinks about the ethics of critique and the ethic of care. Then as a team, you're going to come to consensus and decide which one you want to go with, A, B, or C, and then how are you going to defend this decision? Now, the important part here in part 4 and phase 4 is that we need to reflect. Once we make these decisions, it's not like they're done and we walk away. One of the things I often ask you to think about is think about your initial reaction. Did your final decision different? I would be honest with you, in my experience in doing this over the last 4 or 5 years, about 50% of the time, groups will say, no, our final decision is pretty similar to what our initial reaction was. And about 50% of the time, people will say, oh, no, we moved in a completely different direction. What I find fascinating, though, is that the people who say that their decision didn't really change from their initial reactions, they always add a little bit more and say, but now we can defend it. We know that we did the right thing because we've worked through it, and which is wonderful, I think. The other thing I want you to think about is leadership styles. What kinds of leadership styles would someone who's in charge of this and holds this moral, issue in their hand have to call upon? What leadership virtues or character strengths would they have to call upon to deal with this dilemma? So you can see how it's a process that slows down the idea of making decisions, of dealing with a case study, of dealing with a dilemma. And it also emphasizes working as a team. Because when we're in schools these days, people rarely make decisions on their own, cold on their feet. There's a leadership team. And wise leaders cultivate a team that they can bounce ideas off of when they're making critical decisions. Now, the other thing I want to share with you, if I can figure out what's going wrong with my screen, is, okay, I'm having trouble with Chrome. I don't know why. Let's see. Okay. I think I got it. One of these days I'm going to be a real techie, but probably not today. So you can see my screen now, right? Yes. We're in Canvas. Okay. So when we're in Canvas and we click on the ethical dilemma, there's a couple things in this area that I want you to be aware of. Okay. So this is a template for notes that you're going to use. You can download it. It's a Word document. You have two choices in your team, and whatever you're comfortable with, you can assign one person to be your scribe, and they will type in your answers in each sections of the template. Some people take it and copy and paste it into Google Docs and share the doc, and people talk and type together. That's your choice. The case study is right here. The one for this evening is called "There's No Place Like School." So you'll download that and you'll read it. The slides that I just showed you, that ethical dilemma reflection framework, over time, I've now worked with a graphic designer, and we have it also in a graphic here that makes it a little easier if you want to pull that up on your screen, helpful. When you're talking about having to work with, make decisions about virtues, I always want to remind you what ours are, right? We've got our 16 core virtues. But also people ask about leadership style. So one of the things I have here is I put in a document that really gives you an explanation about all the different leadership styles that you consider. This is probably going to spin for me now and not open, but you can also download it. Yeah, we'll try again. Okay, you can download it if you want to look at it. The other thing that I put in there, a lot of times people aren't really sure what some of these virtues mean. So there's a document here that talks about significant character virtues and what are the key definitions. And then if you want to move beyond, which you should, I mean, these are not the only 16 virtues in the world. Here's a list of 100. Here's another list of 100. Here's another list of 80, another 52, another 40. So lots of resources here so that when you're working with your team on your ethical dilemma, you can pull up these documents. And I have them in every single module so that you can work with them that way. So your task is going to be, I'm going to put you in your groups. You're going to turn off your camera. You're going to take about a 10-minute break. And during that break, I want you to download and read the case study, the one that's entitled "There's No Place Like School." Once you're ready to start having a conversation with your group, you're going to turn your camera on in your group, designate how you're going to take the notes, and then work your way through the 4 phases. Now, we are looking at probably starting this at about 7:35, which means it's going to give us, maybe 45 minutes. We may or may not get through all of it tonight, but I want you to go through the process and get used to it, get a feel for it. I'll be coming in and out of your groups, helping you with any questions you might have. But I think it's going to be something that you will enjoy. I know that students that have graduated from the program have used this with their faculty, modified it and used it with their students. And I think what's going to happen is when I speak about this in groups, when I present this at conferences, I talk about how I want you to develop your ethical fitness. I want you to develop the muscle memory that using this framework, working through these phases, you start to internalize it, and it becomes a natural way in which you approach problem solving and handling dilemmas. That's my hope and my prayer. Any questions before I put you back in groups? So you're going to take a break? Yes?
Where the document that you want us to take notes on, is that the one with the
It says template on it if you're in module 3 and you're in the ethical dilemma section, there's one that says template for taking notes.
Okay.
Do you see it?
Then
I see the ethical dilemma. I'm looking for the template.
Right here, you see ethical dilemma reflection framework template for notes.
Hold on. I'm sorry.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, now I see your screen.
Do you see it here?
Okay. I see it there, and I have to just find it on the other place.
Yes. I think I've got this open in week 2, and it should be open in week 3. So let me see if I can go back to that. I'm probably confusing you by doing that, but it's in week 3. So here's the template, and here's
Okay.
the case study in week 3.
Okay.
Is that good?
Yes, that's good. Thank you.
Okay.
Professor, are we expected to email you our finished document
At the end of the evening, I will ask whoever is in charge of the notes to email that form to me because, of course, I use it for research and to understand what's going on in all your groups because I'll be popping in and out, but I won't catch every piece of it.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks for asking, Angelica. Okay. Here we go. Take a break, read, and let's get into some rich discussions.